Let's create a Mola inspired design with the reverse applique method. We're going to begin by making a template for our symmetrical design. So since we know that this is going to be symmetrical, we're only going to draw half of the design because we're going to be using it on folded paper. So this is going to be a little bit more of a geometric design, and I am just going to use a pencil to sort of plan out what I want that symmetrical design to look like. You could also just do this freehand on the paper and not make a template first. Once you are happy with the lines you have drawn, it's time to cut out your template. First, choose the color that you plan to use for the top of your Mola design. And once you have chosen that color, you are going to fold that piece of paper in half. It is helpful to start out with all of your papers already pre-cut to the same size. I like to use square paper. Place the straight edge of your template along the folded side of the paper, because when you do this, you're going to end up with a larger design. Because I'm using a black paper, I am tracing my template with a white colored pencil. That's going to show up easier on the black paper when I need to cut it out. When I'm done tracing this, I'm going to keep the paper folded and then cut out my design. You will notice that as I'm cutting, I'm being very careful to cut around the design in the center and not cut through to the edge of the paper. It's very important that the edge of the paper stays together and does not get cut. Set aside the cut out piece. You won't need it for this project, but you might want to save it to use for something else. Next, fold your next color in half. And then you're going to take your piece that you already cut and sort of wrap it around, almost like making a book with different book pages. So wrap it around the paper you folded so that the folded edge of the paper lines up with the folded edge of your first paper. And now you should be able to see the design and see the other color. You're going to use a pencil to redraw that shape, that middle shape. But this time you don't want to go all the way up to the edge of the design. You want to leave a little bit of space because when you cut it out, you want that yellow to still show. So leave a little bit of a space, a little border as you're tracing the inside of your shape. Now I am going to slide that paper out, put the first paper off to the side. I don't need it right now. And I'm going to cut out this shape that I just drew. The same way that I cut out the shape the first time. I don't want to break or cut the edge of the paper, just that middle design. And now we're going to move on to the third color. So the same way we did it before, we're going to pick our paper, fold it in half, and then nest that new folded paper inside the last paper. So for me, the last paper was the yellow one. That's the one that's going to wrap around on the folded side for the orange paper for me. You might have different colors. Then I'm going to use the pencil again and trace that shape on the inside, leaving a space. You want to have a space so you can see both colors. After you've traced it, cut it out. The final color, final piece of paper does not get cut at all because it is the base paper. So now I'm going to open up all of the pieces I've already done, starting with the orange one or my last piece, and place that over the base paper, which for me is the red, and then open up the one before that, the yellow, and line that up on top of the orange. And then open up the black and line that up on top of the yellow so that I can make sure I can see through to all of the colors. I've noticed a lot of space in the corners, and this is where it gets a little tricky because I want to cut through and see some of the colors underneath. So you might have other ways that you want to do this, but remember you can't break the edge. So you do have to fold the paper when you make your cuts to cut a shape. I'm just cutting some triangle shapes into the corners. I've decided that I want to see at least one other color showing through in the corners, but I don't really want to try to cut triangles again, so I am using a hole punch, and I'm going to punch a little circle shape into the yellow paper so that I can see through the yellow to the orange underneath. This is a much easier way to cut shapes into the paper than trying to fold it. Now it's time to glue all of these papers into place, and I like to do that using just white glue. I squirt some or pour some into a little cap or lid, and then I'm going to be applying it with a really cheap paintbrush. So you might have a different way that you like to use glue. I find that this works really well to apply it to paper to make sure that I don't use too much, but I still cover the whole surface of the paper. So I'm going to disassemble or take apart my layers and then start gluing with the bottom layer. The first thing I'm going to do is actually move my base paper out of the way because I don't want to get any stray glue on it. And now I am ready to start putting glue on, which for me is the orange layer. Yours might be a different color. I am just painting that glue on so that it covers the entire surface of the paper, just spreading it out, making sure that it goes to all of the edges. This is where it gets a little tricky because I have to flip this paper over and now attach it to the base paper, and I don't want to get any stray glue. So I'm going to be very careful and try to look as I'm placing the paper down so that I'm lining it up to the edge. Very carefully, very slowly. I don't want it to stick permanently, at least not right away. And then I'm going to smooth it out so that there are very little, if any, wrinkles in my paper. I want it as smooth as I can get it, and just very carefully placing it where I want it before I push down too much and make sure that it's fully stuck. It's now time for the next layer. For me, that's the yellow layer. I'm going to try a little bit of a different technique when applying glue this time because that last technique was really tricky and really hard to do. So I am going to be very careful not to get glue on the layers underneath, refill my glue if I need to, and I'm just going to apply glue to one section before I flip it over and see if that makes it a little easier for me, gives me less wrinkles to have to worry about, and just do one section at a time, flipping over the paper as I need to get the glue on the underside. Okay, so that second technique was a little bit more manageable. You might want to do that one all the time because it definitely was easier to do. And now I am on to the final piece, the black layer, which is my final color. You might have a different color, but this was my final color, and I'm pretty much going to do the same kind of thing of just applying glue to one section and then flipping it over and attaching it instead of trying to do it again all at once because that was just too tricky. But for this one, I'm mostly going to work on the edges first and then the middle pieces. Whew, I am sure glad all of that gluing is done because it was a lot of work. But there it is. That is the finished layered mola. It's not quite all the way done. We're still going to add some details in the next step. Okay, so we want our mola to look like it has some stitching on it without actually sewing it, and we are going to do that by using paint and some tools like skewers or a small paintbrush. And again, I'm using these caps to keep my paint colors in because caps are just amazing for using to dispense small amounts of paints or glues. And I'm starting with the bamboo skewer. I'm dipping it into the first color paint that I want to use, and I am going to use this to make some marks around the outer edge of the central design. I want it to kind of look like I'm making little sewn stitches with thread, even though I'm really not. So I'm going to do that around the entire design using this one paint color. After wiping off the end of my bamboo skewer to clean off that first paint color, I am switching over to this bright neon yellow, and I'm going to now use that to go around the ends of the shapes or petals, or I don't know what this design is, but it's going to go around the ends so that way I have a little bit of a different color and it's not quite all the same. Switching back to that first color again, I'm now going to add some stitching details around the triangles, the other part of my design. We want this to look like these are layers of fabric that are being held in place by sewn stitches. So any place that I had a cutout shape needs to have some stitching where it would be theoretically holding it together. You may have noticed that as I'm painting these stitches in or drawing these stitches in, I sometimes turn my paper. Turning your paper is a much easier way to do this so that you don't accidentally smear or smudge the marks you already made. So it is totally fine to turn your paper. Now I'm going to switch to using the small paintbrush because I want to start to add some more details that are a little bit wider, a little thicker, the paint marks. And I'm thinking of things that you might traditionally see in Mola designs. So in Mola designs, you might see some rectangular shapes, some triangles that are connected, almost looking like teeth, or even some really windy maze looking patterns. So I'm going to use the white paint and my paintbrush to add some of these more traditional Mola designs to my artwork. As you are adding your designs, you want to remember that this design has symmetry. So anything you do in one area, you should try to repeat it or mirror it in an opposite side. So I did the 5 rectangles on one side, I'm doing 5 rectangles on the opposite side. When I'm making the maze design, I'm trying to repeat that maze design on the opposite side so that it has symmetry. I've decided that I don't really like how the white looks. It looks a little transparent and see-through, and I can still see the black of the paper showing through. So I've decided to mix a little bit of the blue in with the white to make this light blue color. And I am now going over all of the things that I painted with white with this new mixed light blue color. It's going to make it more opaque, or I can't see through it like I could before. And I kind of like it better with this light blue. This is my finished Mola. Together, we used a reverse applique method of cutting through the layers to see the colors underneath. This is the same way that a traditional Mola would be made.